My wife regrets taking advice about open marriages. I am here asking for guidance on how I can repair what remains of our marriage. Let me begin by saying that I have been married to my husband for 5 years, and we have been together for 7. For simplicity, I will refer to us as Mike and Amanda. We met during our second year at a local community college. I completed a 2-year degree in office administration, while Mike pursued a 4-year bachelor's degree in business management through a university offering remote classes on campus. Fast forward to now, I am 26, and Mike is 27. We had plans to start a family this year. Our dream was to have 4 children, ideally 2 boys and 2 girls. We were incredibly happy together, and our families adored both of us. But here is where I truly messed up. I developed what some people call a work spouse, though, in my case, it involved a delivery driver who worked for a major shipping company. For the sake of confidentiality, I will call him Eric. At 25 and single, Eric had been making regular deliveries to my office for about 2 years. From the very first meeting, there was an undeniable connection. It was not romantic exactly, but there was an energy I could not ignore. I found myself drawn to him, and we would chat for at least 10 minutes every time he stopped by. I even made sure I was near the front desk whenever his deliveries arrived. One day, our conversation took a turn. Eric said he wanted to ask me something personal. He seemed hesitant and assured me that he did not want to offend me or create problems at work. I assured him it was fine to ask. That is when Eric admitted, "I feel a strong attraction toward you. Do you feel the same way?" His straightforwardness caught me off guard. I took a moment, gathered my thoughts, and replied honestly, "Yes, I feel it too." He then confessed that if I were not married, he would have asked me out. I thanked him for his honesty, and we left it at that. For the following week, our conversations were brief and awkward. I could not help feeling uneasy, as if I had crossed an unspoken line. At home, life with Mike was as blissful as ever. Let me make one thing clear, I was completely satisfied with Mike in every way. He was my best friend, my partner, and my everything. I believed at the time that he felt the same about me. But despite how wonderful Mike was, I began to entertain selfish thoughts about having both my loving husband and some kind of connection with Eric outside of work. Later, I learned this mindset is often referred to as wanting to have your cake and eat it too. Curiosity led me down a rabbit hole, and I started reading about polyamory and open marriages. At first, the concept seemed bizarre and unappealing. I brushed it off, thinking Mike would never agree to something like this. I also feared it could harm our relationship or alienate us from our families, which I deeply valued. Weeks went by, and life at home was still as happy as ever. However, I could not shake the idea of connecting with Eric. I began researching the subject again and came across a blog post titled "It Never Hurts to Ask." The post was written by a woman who claimed she had a thriving open marriage. She loved her husband but also wanted to explore a relationship with a man she met through volunteer work. The blogger described how she struggled to bring up the topic with her husband for over 2 years. Then, during a casual car ride, she gathered the courage to ask. To her surprise, her husband was open to the idea. According to her, they established ground rules, opened their marriage, and found happiness dating other people while remaining married. She claimed they had been living this way for 4 years and were closer than ever. Her story resonated with me because it mirrored what I secretly wanted but was too afraid to discuss with Mike. One quiet Sunday morning, as we sat on the couch browsing our phones and chatting, I decided to ask him. "I read this post online about open marriages," I began. "What do you think about the idea?" Mike paused and asked, "Are you talking about couples sleeping with other people?" I nodded and repeated my question. His reaction was immediate and firm. "That is disgusting," he said. "If someone wants to sleep around, they should just get a divorce." Trying to make the topic sound less extreme, I explained that open marriages were becoming more common in the United States and other Western countries. However, Mike's expression made it clear he was completely put off by the idea. Sensing his discomfort, I quickly changed the subject and resolved never to mention it again. For a couple of weeks, life continued as usual. Then, one night, as we lay in bed, high on the joy of intimacy, Mike caught me off guard. When you mentioned open marriages, he asked, who were you thinking about? My heart sank, and my stomach churned. Slowly, I raised my head to look at him and replied, what do you mean? He explained that he had read about women bringing up open relationships only when they either had someone in mind or had already crossed a boundary. You can be honest with me, he added. I know you too well. I can tell when something is off. I froze for a moment, but then I told him the truth. I had not cheated, nor would I ever. However, I admitted that if we ever considered opening our marriage, there was someone at work I might consider. Tell me about him, Mike said. So, I told him about Eric, our conversations, the chemistry, and even Eric's bold confession. However, I stopped short of admitting that I had reciprocated Eric's feelings. What Mike said next sent a chill through me. You know, that counts as cheating, he stated matter-of-factly. I had never even heard the term emotional affair until Mike explained it to me that night. The more he talked, the more frustrated I became. Finally, he suggested we drop the conversation for now because he needed to get some sleep for an early morning at work. Mike drifted off quickly, but I lay there wide awake. My thoughts were racing, and guilt weighed heavily on me. I grabbed my phone and started researching emotional affairs. The more I read, the worse I felt. Mike was absolutely right. What I had with Eric was not just towing the line, it was a full-blown emotional affair. That realization hit me hard, and I felt like I had betrayed my husband in the worst way. Unable to sleep, I got out of bed, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in the quiet living room. I eventually fell asleep on the couch around 4 a.m. Just a couple of hours later, at 6:45 a.m., Mike woke me with a kiss before heading off to work. He reminded me it was almost 7 a.m. and time for me to start my day too. I kissed him back and told him I loved him, trying to put extra meaning behind my words because of the guilt I carried. For several days after that, life went on as normal, though I could not stop thinking about the conversation. Then one evening, while we were lying in bed after an intimate moment, Mike shocked me by saying he would be open to trying an open marriage if it was something I truly wanted. I was stunned. Why are you saying this now? I asked, genuinely confused. He explained that he had been reflecting on our discussions and figured that if we wanted to try something like that, it would be better to do it while we were still young. His calm demeanor left me bewildered. I told him that I would never want to jeopardize our marriage or love because he was the most important person in my life. To this, Mike replied, if our love is strong enough, it can survive infidelity. I tried to argue that a consensual open marriage was not the same as infidelity since both partners agreed to it. Instead of responding to that, Mike simply said, let's consider our marriage open starting now. His nonchalant attitude unnerved me, and I suggested that we should slow down and establish some ground rules before making any decisions. Mike was firm about keeping it simple, setting only 3 rules. We had to inform each other in advance about who we planned to see and when. We needed to disclose the encounter afterward, though not in graphic detail. Protection had to be used for every encounter, no exceptions. I agreed to these terms but suggested adding 2 more. We would keep our arrangement private. We would promise that these outside relationships would not destroy our marriage. Mike immediately rejected both of my suggestions, saying he could not and would not agree to them. He refused to discuss it further, leaving me feeling uneasy and confused. His sudden change of stance felt entirely out of character, but I decided to let it go for the night. I cuddled up to him, and we fell asleep. In the weeks that followed, I did not pursue the idea of an open relationship, though the unease about the whole thing lingered. I continued to distance myself from Eric at work, keeping our conversations short and focused on surface-level topics like the weather or our workloads. Then one day, Eric pulled me aside during a delivery. I really miss our talks, he said. Is something wrong? I tried to brush it off, telling him that life had just been busy both at work and at home. But in my mind, I started debating whether I should tell him about the open marriage. After wrestling with the idea, I decided to tell him. Looking back, I wish I could undo that choice. It was such a terrible mistake. Knowing the office was not the right setting for a personal conversation, I asked Eric if he would meet me for a drink after work. He agreed, and we met at a local bar with a cozy outdoor patio. The warm spring air made the setting feel relaxed, though I was anything but. I explained to Eric that Mike and I had recently opened our marriage and asked him directly if he would be interested in starting a relationship with me. Without hesitation, Eric said yes. He admitted he had been waiting for me to come around but had not pushed the idea out of respect. He even revealed that he had been dreaming about me for months. We spent most of the evening flirting, and by the end of our conversation, we had agreed to meet at his apartment the next day after work. I made it clear to Eric that I would need to leave by 6:30 p.m. so I could get home to Mike, who remained my top priority. Eric was fine with that, and we finalized our plans. That night, I went home and made a special dinner for Mike. After we ate, I decided to be transparent with him. I told him about my conversation with Eric and explained that we had set a date for the following evening. "If you're still comfortable with this arrangement, I'll move forward," I said, hoping for some reassurance. Mike seemed taken aback. "Oh, so you're meeting him tomorrow?" he asked. I nodded but quickly added that I could cancel everything if he had changed his mind. "You and our marriage are my priority," I assured him. He paused for a moment before saying, "No, let's do this." We hugged, but something about his embrace felt different, distant and stiff, unlike the warmth I was used to. I chalked it up to nerves. That evening, we mostly kept to ourselves, with Mike working in his office and me handling my own tasks. When we went to bed, I tried to initiate intimacy, but Mike said he was too tired. The next morning, I woke up to find that Mike had already left for work. He had sent me a text saying he had an early meeting he had forgotten to mention. He ended the message by saying he would see me that evening. His abrupt departure felt unusual, but I brushed it off and focused on getting ready for work. That day, I wore an outfit I thought Eric would appreciate, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness about our planned date. Throughout the day, I texted Mike several times, but he did not respond. By mid-afternoon, I started second-guessing everything and thought about canceling the date with Eric. Looking back now, I wish I had. At 4:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. "I love you," it read. "See you tonight." That message gave me a sense of relief and what I interpreted as his blessing to proceed. I could not have been more wrong. I will cut to the chase. Eric and I met that evening, and the physical connection was intense, not quite as satisfying as what I shared with Mike, and certainly lacking any real emotional attachment, but it was thrilling in its own way, mostly because of the forbidden nature of what we were doing. I stayed at his place for about an hour and a half before heading home, arriving at 6:40 p.m. When I got home, I was surprised to find that Mike was not there yet. At first, I was relieved because it gave me time to shower and toss my clothes in the washing machine to erase the scent of Eric's cologne. I did not want Mike to pick up on anything that would expose what I had done. Even though the encounter was physically fulfilling, I felt a profound wave of guilt, shame, and self-loathing. I could not shake the feeling that I had tainted something pure. I was torn, my mind filled with anxiety over what I had done. To try and ease my guilt, I decided to prepare a quick but special dinner for Mike. I even lit some candles to create a romantic atmosphere. I wanted him to know how much I loved him and that what I did with Eric meant absolutely nothing compared to the bond one shared with him. It was just a physical act, not even remotely close to the deep connection and love I had with Mike. I was hoping we would end the night in each other's arms, making love. I know some of you might think this sounds selfish or even disgusting, but I want to emphasize that I was cautious. I used protection with Eric every step of the way, and there was no exchange of fluids of any kind. By 7:30 p.m., Mike still had not come home. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text letting him know I was home and waiting for him to join me for dinner. I got no response. By 8:50 p.m., I started to get worried. I kept calling him, leaving voicemails, and sending more texts. Finally, around 9:30 p.m., he sent me a message that said, "Do not wait up. I will be home late." I replied, asking where he was and who he was with, but he never answered. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I eventually fell asleep after midnight. I woke up to the sound of water running in the guest bathroom. Confused, I got up to check what was going on. The door was locked, which was completely unlike Mike. I knocked, but there was no response. After about 10 minutes, Mike emerged from the bathroom with a towel wrapped around him. "Hey, how was your night?" he asked casually. I told him it was fine, but his demeanor was unsettling. Then, without hesitation, he asked, "Did you sleep with Eric?" His phrasing stung, and I told him not to use such a crude term, but I admitted that, yes, Eric and I had been together. I then asked him where he had been, noticing the faint scent of perfume on his clothes. He said he had been out at a few bars and went dancing. I pressed further, asking who he was with. His reply was cold and direct: "I do not need to tell you because we did not sleep together." This was the first time I had ever heard him use such harsh language toward me. It worried me deeply. I asked him why he had used the guest bathroom to shower, and his response shook me. "I will be using the guest bedroom and bathroom until you take 2 STD tests," he said bluntly. His words crushed me. I tried to defend myself, saying, this was not part of the rules. I made sure Eric used protection for everything we did. But Mike retorted, "Have you never heard of oral herpes or HPV? I am not getting anywhere near you until you are cleared. Consider this my version of social distancing." I broke down, crying uncontrollably, and told him I wanted to close our marriage. This was not what I had wanted, and I hated how things were turning out. Mike shot back, "No way. You had your turn, and now I am going to have mine." Devastated, I kept crying as he calmly stated that he was going to bed because he had an early meeting and needed rest. I stayed on the couch, crying until I eventually fell asleep. By the time I woke up, Mike was already gone. He had left me a text that read, "Do not wait up for me." Throughout the day, I tried calling and texting him, but he ignored every attempt. I felt sick to my stomach, convinced that I had ruined my marriage. Eric was not scheduled to make any deliveries that day, so I did not see him at work. Instead, I called him after work, asking if we could meet up that evening. He agreed and mentioned that I sounded upset. I told him I was, but that we would talk in person. When we met, I told him everything. I explained that opening my marriage had been a massive mistake and that I wanted to end whatever was happening between us. I told him I loved my husband and only wanted to focus on repairing my marriage. Eric said he understood, but before we parted ways, he asked for one last hookup. He promised that afterward, he would never approach me again outside of work. Foolishly, I agreed. We had one more brief, meaningless encounter. It was a lackluster experience, lasting less than 10 minutes. As soon as it was over, Eric looked at me with a mix of disappointment and disdain. "That was terrible," he said bluntly. "You just laid there like a tree trunk." I apologized, admitting that my heart was not in it and that this whole situation had been a colossal mistake. I got dressed, gave him a quick hug, and started to leave. Before I walked out, Eric muttered, "I will never understand women like you." I asked him what he meant, but he just shook his head and said, "Never mind," with a look of disgust. His expression haunted me as I drove home, crying the entire way. How could I have been so stupid? I had thrown away everything for nothing. Absolutely nothing. When I asked Eric what he meant by his comment, he just shrugged and said, "Nothing." No comment, though his expression made it clear he thought very little of me. His look of disgust pierced through me. I quickly grabbed my things, left his apartment, and cried the entire drive home. How could I have been so foolish? I had destroyed my marriage, for what? For nothing at all. I truly felt like the dumbest person on the planet. The shame and guilt were suffocating, and I could not shake the overwhelming sense of dirtiness I felt inside and out. Mike did not come home until 1 a.m. that night. By Friday, the distance between us had grown even colder. Mike left the house before I woke up, leaving a text behind that said, "Do not wait up for me." This cold detachment broke my heart into a million pieces. I loved spending time with Mike in the mornings, having lazy evenings together, cooking meals for him, and cuddling on the couch as we talked about silly things. Those moments of closeness that I treasured so much were all gone, and the emptiness of our home was unbearable. Desperate to bridge the gap, I sent Mike a text asking if we could talk the next morning. He replied, "Okay, first thing in the morning. I have plans for the rest of the day." I responded by asking where he would be going, but he never texted back. That night, he came home at 1:30 a.m. I stayed silent, lying in bed with tears streaming down my face. He took a shower in the guest bathroom and went straight to bed without saying a word to me. The next morning, I got up early, determined to talk to him before he disappeared again. He came into the kitchen at 7 a.m., poured himself a glass of orange juice, and sat down at the table. He avoided eye contact and immediately began scrolling through his phone, his demeanor icy and detached. I could not stand it. I walked over, sat down on his lap, and said, "Look at me." He turned his head away, but I gently grabbed his face, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Mike," I began, tears already welling up in my eyes, "I love you with all my heart. I made a terrible decision, not a mistake, a decision, and I am so sorry. I will do anything to earn back your trust and your love." He said nothing, just stared at me like I had lost my mind. I asked him, "Do you still love me?" He stayed silent. "Mike, please," I begged, "answer me." After what felt like an eternity, he finally said, "I do not know." My heart shattered. I began sobbing and told him, "I can make this right. I know I can." He shook his head and replied, "I do not think you can." Frustrated and hurt, I lashed out and said, "You planned all of this, didn't you? You wanted a reason to divorce me. You set me up." He denied it but admitted that as soon as I brought up the idea of an open marriage, he had a gut feeling that our relationship was doomed. "I read about this kind of thing," he said. "It almost always ends badly." Through my tears, I asked, "Why did you not just stop me? Why did you not demand that I end all contact with Eric?" His response was calm but gut-wrenching, "You cannot force someone to be faithful. You either are, or you are not. And clearly, you are not." I begged him to give us another chance. "I am faithful, Mike. I am. Please, do not throw us away," I cried. But he said nothing. He got up, grabbed his keys, and said, "I am leaving." "Where are you going?" I asked through my tears. "I will be back after midnight," he said flatly. Trying to keep the conversation going, I reminded him that tomorrow was Easter Sunday and that we were supposed to leave at 7 a.m. to visit my parents. My family adored Mike, and we always spent holidays with them, especially since his own parents now lived in Florida. He dropped another bombshell. "I am not going," he said without emotion. His words left me stunned. "What?" "Mike, please come with me. I need you there," I begged. He looked at me coldly and said, "No." Desperate, I asked, "What am I supposed to tell my family?" "I do not care," he replied. "Just tell them the truth." I kept pleading with him, but it was useless. He packed a gym bag with clothes and left the house without another word. I felt completely destroyed, broken in every possible way. Now, I am turning to you for advice. Has anyone here experienced something similar? Is it even possible to save a marriage after this kind of betrayal? I would love to hear from people who have gone through something like this and managed to reconcile. Thank you for listening to my story. I am going back to bed to cry for the rest of the day. Update 1. I wanted to provide an update. First, I want to sincerely thank everyone who offered their feedback and support. It truly helped me get through these last few days. Many of you rightly criticized me, even called me awful names, and honestly, I deserve it. I still appreciate every word, even the harsh ones. Easter Sunday and the following day have been some of the hardest days of my life. When I drove to my parents' house for Easter, the first question they asked me was, "Where's Mike?" I lied and said he had an emergency at work and would not be able to make it. I only said this to avoid ruining the family gathering. At first, they believed me, but as the day went on, they became suspicious. Normally, I would be texting Mike or calling him, but that day, I barely touched my phone. To keep up the lie, I started sending fake texts, pretending to be talking to him. I even told my family he was swamped at the office but promised to call me the next day. The truth? Mike never called or texted, not even to check if I had arrived safely. That silence broke my heart. I stayed overnight at my parents' house, knowing that I would need to come clean about our marital problems the next day. I dreaded it because I knew how they would react, and I was right to fear it. On Monday morning, I told them everything. Their response was exactly what I expected: yelling, anger, disappointment. They called me horrible names and told me they did not raise me to behave like this. They were furious. My mom called my sister over, and she joined in, berating me for my actions. I broke down and apologized repeatedly, telling them how sorry I was and how much I regretted my decisions. I promised them I would never make such a mistake again and assured them my only focus moving forward was to win back Mike's trust and love. Though they were deeply upset with me, they eventually told me they still loved me. They said they would pray for me and for my marriage to survive this. I left for home Monday evening, but throughout the day, I had been calling and texting Mike. He never answered. When I got home, there was a note on the kitchen counter. Mike had gone to Florida to visit his parents and would not be back until Sunday. Reading that note was devastating. We had planned to visit his parents together in early May, and now, because of me, those plans were ruined. I hate myself for everything I have done. That is all I can manage to share for now. I am incredibly depressed. The scariest part is that I am no longer crying. The pain and remorse are so deep now that tears feel meaningless. Update 2. It has been almost a year since I last posted, and I had not planned on updating again. However, the overwhelming response from the community has prompted me to share where I am now. The news is both bad and good. First, the bad news: I am divorced. It became final last December. In the end, Mike decided he could not stay married to me after everything that happened. He told me he would never be able to trust me again and that he felt embarrassed to be seen in public with me. He also said that getting divorced made him feel like he regained his masculinity. I do not agree with that statement. He never lost his masculinity, in my opinion, but I guess it is how he feels. No one knows about what happened with Eric except for our families, so I think he is wrong to feel that way, but it is not my place to argue anymore. Now for the good, or maybe great, news: Mike and I started dating again last month. We reconnected on Valentine's Day, and since then, things have been amazing. We see each other about once a week, and our physical connection is stronger than ever, far more intense than it was when we first met 7 years ago. However, Mike has been very clear about his boundaries. He told me this is purely physical and that we will never get married again, live together, or be a couple in the traditional sense. I have accepted this arrangement, for now. In truth, I am not entirely okay with it, but I am willing to take what I can get. My ultimate goal is to win Mike back completely. And if that does not happen, I have one other hope: to have his children. Let me be clear, I would never trap Mike with a baby. That is not who I am. But I would love to have children with him, even if we are not married. I have thought about how we could share custody and make it work as co-parents. I know this sounds crazy to some people, but I love him deeply. I do not want children with anyone else. I am aware that having kids with Mike might make it difficult for me to move on or pursue a relationship with another man, but I am willing to accept that risk. Truthfully, I do not want anyone else. That is all I have for now. I probably will not post again unless something major changes, but I would love to hear your thoughts on my situation. Do you think I am crazy for dating Mike again? Should I move on, find someone new, and start a family with that person instead? P.S. Eric is not, and has never been, an option. He was a huge mistake, and I will never go down that road again. Thank you for reading.